Hi, welcome to Perp Miniatures. I'm going to be kitbashing a Goliath unborn ganger specialist with a grenade launcher. I started with a body from the base Goliath kit, but to show that he is an unborn, that he didn't start his life as a Goliath, I'll be attaching a squat leg to show something went wrong with the operation that made him a Goliath. So I cut the half leg off of the Goliath body and cleaned up the cut. Then I tested a leg from the Leagues of Votann Chthonian Berserkers kit. It fit pretty well, so I glued it onto the Goliath body. Then I glued the rest of the Goliath leg to the other side. To make the squat leg stand at the same height as the other leg, I mixed up some green stuff and milliput in equal parts and made a rough rectangular block and left that to dry. Once that was set, I came back and cut down the block. The plan was to make it look like this Goliath was standing on 2 bricks in order to level out his feet. So I cut the block to about the width and length of the small foot. Then I cut a line down the middle and scraped a small channel in it to show the 2 different bricks. I drilled 2 holes through the sides of both bricks and superglued this to the bottom of the squat foot. After that dried, I came back in with florist wire to show how these bricks are attached to the foot. I started by making small sections that crisscrossed between holes in the bricks, and glued these into place, repeating this for the opposite sides of the bricks. Then to actually attach the bricks to the foot, I glued one end of a wire into the bricks and wrapped the wire around the ankle of the foot several times before gluing the other end into the opposite side of the bricks. I wanted this Goliath to be equipped with a grenade launcher, so I grabbed this RPG bit from the Kill Team Hernkin Jaegers. I only wanted his one leg to be short, so the squat arm of the RPG had to be replaced. I clipped the arm off of the wrist and tested the fit of an arm from the Goliath kit. After a lot of clipping and scraping, I was happy with the result, so I glued the RPG to the arm. Once that dried a bit, I glued the arm to the body. With the weapon arm in place, I glued a Goliath head on so it was looking in the same direction the weapon was pointed. Then for the right arm, I snipped one of the arms that doesn't have a hand attached, drilled holes for pinning, and glued the arm to the body. Then I cut a hand from one of the Goliath 2-handed weapons and scraped the sides where the handle was smooth. After that, I very carefully cut the middle finger out of the hand and scraped that part smooth as well. I drilled a very small hole into the knuckle of the middle finger and glued in a piece of florist wire, and while that was drying, glued the hand to the arm. After the florist wire dried, I took some sprue goo and covered the wire to make a rough form of a finger. Then I took my plastic glue and used the brush from the applicator to smooth out the sprue goo into the final shape of the finger, leaving me with this. For the base, I wanted it to be fairly simple, but to put in a small detail I think would really add to the model. So I started by gluing down a piece of diamond plate pattern plastic card. After that dried, I cut the excess plastic card off the base and smoothed it out by scraping with the side of my X-Acto blade. Then I drilled holes for pinning in the foot of the Goliath and glued the model down to the base. Before finishing the base, I forgot to add a piece to the model that would tie it to the rest of the gang. So I took a piece from the stone face basing kit from Bad Squiddo Games and trimmed that down to fit as a shoulder pad on the RPG arm and glued that into place. While I was at it, I glued another shoulder pad from the Goliath kit to the other shoulder. Then to finish out the base, I really wanted to add a rectangular footprint and some mud behind the Goliath's brick foot. So I took part of the green stuff block I used for the bricks initially and cut that down to a similar sized point. I brushed some texture paste onto the blank spot of the base, and a little onto the plastic card part as well. Then took my green stuff block and pushed it into the texture paste behind the brick foot to form the footprint. It's a little hard to see on the camera, but I'm very happy with the results. And with that, the build is done. While I paint him, I'll be reading out his backstory. The story of 2 Brick Mick. In a haze, Mick started coming back to consciousness, his eyes barely able to focus in the bright light of the surgery room. Mick tried to roll over and felt a sharp pain in his side as something sharp poked at him. Recoiling back, Mick felt around and noticed that he wasn't on the operating table. He was in a pile of trash outside the shop. When his eyes were finally able to focus, he saw the shop was abandoned, almost completely empty, aside from some scattered remnants of gear too large for one man to carry. Mick groaned and tried to get up, bracing himself against the wall he lay on. Able to stand with some effort, he took one step and immediately fell back to the ground as his step didn't connect with the ground. Mick looked at his leg in confusion as he saw now that one of his legs was far shorter than the other. Looking over the rest of his body, he barely recognized himself. He was full of muscle and far larger than he was before, but his one leg looked just as he knew from before his operation. Smacking himself on the forehead, Mick realized his mistake of trusting a new face. He grit his teeth and hopped his way home, using walls to brace against. When he finally made it home, it was dark again, and Mick saw yet another thing that made his stomach churn. His front door was smashed in, and his belongings were torn apart or missing. Over the next many cycles, Mick drifted from outland settlement to outland settlement, trying his best to join any Goliaths there, but because he couldn't keep up on his short leg, he was never allowed to join. One fateful cycle though, while Mick was begging for creds or food on the outskirts of a market, he saw a strange sight. A crew of Goliath walked into the market. Their leader wore a massive stone face upon his armor that covered his head and torso, and he was followed by one of the biggest Goliaths Mick had ever seen before. The massive Goliath wore an engine block strapped to his back. Thinking better of it, Mick knew he would never be allowed to join a gang like that. The size of those two alone told him that. Then Mick saw something that made him rethink that. Those two were followed by a very strange Goliath, one whose head was surrounded in armor that showed a distended brain, himself not being very strong looking. Then the rest of the gang that followed was also full of freaks. As Mick stood to approach though, he heard alarms raised in the market and people all around ran for shelter. He heard engines revving on approach. The Goliath gang that he had been staring at sprang into action, taking cover and readying for a fight. Then the building Mick stood next to exploded as something took the first volley from whatever approached. Mick was sent flying into the market, scattered amongst debris and bricks from the building. In a haze, Mick looked over his surroundings. The market had cascaded into chaos. Bullets flew all around. Outrider quads screamed through the streets. He would never be able to do anything now that he was in a pile of bricks in the middle of the market. Then it hit him. He looked down at his short leg, grabbed at 2 bricks and a stretch of wire that had been blown into the debris pile along with him. Tying the bricks tight against his foot, he checked to make sure it was secure, and then looked around. He saw down one of the main roads of the settlement. An Outrider quad was screaming down, shooting a hail of bullets towards the large-brained Goliath Mick had seen earlier. The big-brained one was completely pinned down, and his cover was taking a beating. Nearby to where he landed, there was a weapons vendor, and laying scattered across the ashen ground was a rocket-propelled grenade. Just what he needed. Mick pumped himself up to get into the action, crouched now on the 2 bricks, and got ready to run for it. As the quad raced by, kicking up a cloud of dirt behind it, Mick went for it. In the flurry, he felt his bullets whizzed by, not knowing how close they were, or if he was even being targeted. Making it to the weapons stall, he crashed to the ground panting, scrambling for the rocket-propelled grenade, and loading it up as fast as his shaking hands would allow. When he was good and ready, he crouched behind the stall, using it for what little cover it would provide. Mick stood and braced the RPG, steadied his aim, and let loose the grenade. In a flash, the quad went up in flames as the grenade hit its mark. Mick cheered before thinking better of it, and taking in the battlefield around him, noticing the big-brained Goliath looking at him, and nodded in thanks to Mick. The fighting didn't last long after that. A few more quads tried to make a run for it, but were met with a flurry of bullets and sent retreating. As the doors of the settlement opened back up and citizens started slowly returning to the market, Mick began moving back to the outskirts where he was panhandling before. He saw the big-brained Goliath talking with the stone-faced one and gesturing in his direction. Then the crew of Goliath approached him. Their leader spoke through some Vox device in his suit.
"You saved my most trusted advisor. He saw your bravery. We could use your help."
The armored Goliath reached out his hand, to which Mick grasped as he was helped to his feet. Without another word, the Goliath turned and motioned for Mick to follow. They all got into some vehicles on the outskirts of town and drove off into the wastes. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed your time here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.